Is he counting us down? He's going to count us down. Thanks for joining us again here at the CP stage. I am Vance Pittman, the president of Sin Network, and real excited about the panel that we're about to host. It is something that is near and dear to my heart. We are going to talk about church planting in the West. God called me 22 years ago to the Western United States. I have such a passion for seeing that happen, and I've got some stellar panelists here with me who are practitioners and people that are engaged in planting churches in the West. I'm going to ask them some questions. I want to introduce them to you, and then I'm just going to throw some questions out, and guys, can't wait to hear from you what God's laid on your heart. So first of all, sitting right next to me is Vergil Brown. Vergil and I just got to meet a little bit ago, but Vergil's a church planter in Portland, Oregon, and name of the church is Redemption Church, and excited to have him on the panel. 18 months in as a church planter there in Portland, but a native from there, which is awesome. That's what movement looks like, so we're excited to have you on the panel. Thanks for joining us. And then Keith Wieser from Resonate Church in Pullman, Washington, and not just one church, but has multiplied a collegiate church planting strategy. I think like 50 different multiplication sites out of the site. Then I know you'll talk about that, but excited, Keith, to have you, man. You are setting a real example for what collegiate church planting looks like across North America, and grateful to have you on the panel. And then David Johnson, our state exec from Arizona, and such a passion for church planting, such a partner for planting, and we're honored, David, to have you on the panel with us today. And then last but not least, somebody near and dear to my heart, my own son in the faith, Heiden Ratner, one of our planters out of Hope Church there in Las Vegas, Nevada. Heiden's planted a great church, Walk Church, that has given us something wonderful. Now at Hope Church, we have grandbabies. Heiden's planted 3 times out of his church, and we have grandchildren, plants, and it's an honor to have you, Heiden, on the panel. So there's our panelists. Let me jump in with a question. To plant churches, you got to have a love for people. But what do you guys love in particular about the people in the West? People in the West. What is it that we love about the people in the West? Somebody jump in and go first.
I think one of the first things that when we moved from Texas to the Northwest, we began to recognize that there's this openness, that transparency, so you can get to the depth of the conversation that you really want to get to so much faster. And so the barriers and the kind of cultural overlay of Christianity wasn't there, that it just allowed you to be able to have some really quick movement towards a gospel conversation. It's really cool.
That's amazing. Somebody else?
I would agree with that. It's we call it being unpretentious. They're not playing a game. There's no like church background that they're trying to get out of or are escaping from. They have no background. They're lost. They don't know the gospel, and for by and large they don't know what the Bible has said. So it's an open slate.
And adding to that, in Portland specifically, there's a curiosity that people have about spiritual matters. So to go along with that openness, there's a lot of questions and exploration that people are willing to do. I really enjoy that as a pastor.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what they were saying. And when I think about the people in the West, right, I'm thinking about my people. I'm thinking about this is something that is near and dear to my heart. Grew up in Las Vegas, didn't go to church until I was in college, and didn't know that there were churches in the city. Right. And so a big burden for my heart with church planting has been to try to reach myself. I'm going back to my hometown thinking, where are the me's, and what would it have taken to reach me? Let me do that. And that's really created a burden. That's created a vision. So, yeah.
Anything else before we move on to the next one? I mean, the people in the West are so easy to love. I love what you've already identified. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, even the idea, it's been touched on, but this sense of like, it's in some ways a pre-Christian place. So when you begin to say, hey, this is what the truth is, that openness to be able to say, when we think about what movement looks like and the kind of the things that are the recipe for that, I find those most, at least in North America, most evident in the West Coast, and be able to think through the potential there to be able to rapidly get to places where people take what they've learned and begin to multiply it into others because there's so few barriers. It's amazing.
You just identified something that I think is super important. A lot of North America is now post-Christian. But I think one of the beauties of the West is we're still largely pre-Christian. Most people have never been exposed to, they're not hostile or anti, they just don't know the gospel. They've never been exposed. So there's an openness like you guys described. So that's amazing. Well, church planting is hard everywhere. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter where you plant a church planting is hard work. But in the Western United States, there are some unique challenges that make it even more difficult. What would you say are some of the challenges that are unique to the West as it pertains to church planting?
I'll go first here. Churches help other churches. So we feed off the work that other good churches are doing. And when there's a really small number of good churches in your city, as a church planter, you're having to invest a lot in cultivating the soil that hasn't been cultivated already, versus being in another part of the country where good churches have been doing good ministry for decades, and you're stepping into kind of a God's stream of redemptive work. And so things can move and progress a lot faster in those places than they can in the West.
It's a great point.
Yeah, I've found that there's just a very real disinterest in church. The culture that I grew up in didn't really create a Sunday morning wake up like interest in church. I never even thought about it. And nobody in my context was doing anything compelling enough to even encourage me to think about it. And I found that even in our attempts, people sometimes just have this, like I'm good. Like I don't, what you're selling is not something I want to pick up. And that's created, I think, a good challenge to rethink how we present the gospel, to rethink how we get creative with our services, whether that's Sunday or groups or community outreach, engaging domains with your life, with your talent, treasure, things like that. I think that's been challenging. And people just, I'm busy. You know, I go into my garage, I close it.
Yeah.
And to try to create, to get in there is not always that easy.
It's a great point, Heiden. There's definitely no Sunday lunch crowd in the West, right? I mean, like there's, back in the Bible Belt, it's like, oh, Sunday lunch, you get in there early so you can get in the line, but no Sunday lunch crowd in Portland, right, Vergil? I mean, like there's nobody, it's just not a thing. So that's a big deal. That's
Maybe
really
a Voodoo Donuts crowd, Hey.
Yeah, but that's the hangover from Saturday night crowd. That's not.
Yeah, there's a brunch crowd, but that's at the church hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else? What are some of the other unique challenges?
One of the things I think is, we'll talk about the mountains are out. Like this idea that when there's so much beauty and there's so much of an opportunity to explore that, whenever there's an opportunity to do that, people are saying, hey, man, I'm out. I'm out enjoying the outdoors in this beautiful environment. And so you're kind of battling that as well, which I never had that in Houston, right? So so that was one of those things that you begin to say, man, no one wants to go hiking when it's 95% humidity. So in that, so you're trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like to be able to say, we've got to fit the gospel into the natural patterns that they have already established in their life, and it requires to have innovation in what we do.
It's great.
Vance, it takes resources to plant churches. And one of the things that we lack sometimes in the West is resources. Our churches are small, and so in Arizona, we find that churches will gather together to plant a church. So one church can't just go off and plant another church. They join together with other churches. So we have several examples of where churches are helping churches, 5, 6 churches partnering together to plant another church. But then other resources are also difficult to come by, like places to meet, just very simply. And then if you do have a place to meet, sometimes the cost of that place can be exorbitant. And so those resources are difficult, and it makes church planting sometimes difficult. So you can start a small group in your home, or you can start in a small place, but getting past that to have groups of any size and buildings of size are difficult in the West.
Yeah, I came from Alabama, and Georgia was kind of what sent me out to Vegas. And back there, people kind of accept the church as a norm. It's just part of society. Whereas when you get into the West, church is not a normal part of the fabric. So to find a meeting space, I tell my friends in Alabama, it'd be like a mosque trying to come in and start in Alabama, and people be like, what is this? It's the same kind of thing. So that's a really good point. One of the unique challenges of the West, if you look at any demographic map of growing areas, cities scattered up and down the West Coast are exploding with growth. Many of our cities are just booming. Their population centers are exploding, and that presents its own unique set of challenges. What are some of the challenges that are created by the incredible growth in population that's happening in the Western United States?
Well, growth in Arizona has been monumental. We're at 8 million people now in our state. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the country. We have the fastest growing city just outside of Phoenix in a place called Buckeye. And these developments of homes are just going in like crazy, but they don't always build in infrastructure for churches or sometimes even schools. And so that's a huge challenge. And it's not just the challenge of growth, but the challenge of what that growth brings, because it's not monolithic. We have multiple cultures from multiple places, from the U.S., from other countries, and so it's a different environment. And so we have people from all over the world that are coming, and then reaching them is not just a matter of putting up a church sign and starting a worship service.
I don't think many people realize what you said at the beginning to be true. Phoenix is now the 5th largest city
We just
in the
overtook
United
Houston.
States of America. Like, that's crazy. I don't think many people would guess that. That's insane. But that's the growth we're talking about. What are some of the other challenges with growth in the West?
Yeah, that's a good word, challenge. And I was thinking about it. I'm staying at the Marriott Hotel, and I walked by the little gym area. I wish I walked in. I walked by it. But on the wall it says, if there's no challenge, there's no change.
Yeah.
And I think these challenges of cities growing, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-talented, multi-sinful, right? There's all types of challenges that are existing in the city.
And I think it's causing, at least for me and my wife and our church, to just continue to think change, to think creativity. Let's try something different. Let's try something new. I think the challenge is change. And asking the questions, like, for example, we just started to realize, okay, we have a large population of Polynesian people. Vegas is known as the 9th island. I had to learn that, and I'm from Vegas. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of Polynesian people in our church. And so I'm asking them, how much culturally do you have to change to fit our service? And creating the space for that conversation just opened up really good conversation. I said, could you guys do a poly night? And we can just learn your culture and bring all your poly friends. And let's do this thing together. Some people were uncomfortable with that. But if there's challenge, there's change. Anyways.
I don't know if this is a challenge, but I really think this is a significant opportunity. I work with, primarily college students, and the first 10 days that they arrive onto campus, they're the most open to be able to have a new relationship or a new connection to friends. And I think about what the implications of growing cities mean in terms of that moment where we have an amazing opportunity to engage people, bring them into gospel community because of the transition that's happening in their lives. And because that's so prolific, we just need more people that are taking advantage of those moments where they're beginning to say, hey, you're new in town, you need community, come be a part of this.
Yeah.
And there's just some ripe fruit if people would just say, hey, I want to plant myself in one of these cities, and to say, I'm going to be a part of something that God is already doing to move people around, and I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity. We just need more people.
Yeah, that's good. Rick Warren taught me years ago that people are most open to conversation in times of transition.
Right.
And a move is a major time of transition. When people are open to relational conversation, gospel conversations. That's a phenomenal point. Anything, Vergil, you would add to this idea of?
Oh, really quickly, we kind of talked about it already,
Yeah.
and that is as demand for space in a city increases, so does the price. So church planting in a city like Portland is incredibly expensive, and talking to partners in other states and telling them, here's the budget you need to plant in a place like Portland, can cause them to take that deep breath, swallow really hard, right, and then give generously to support that work.
That's good. That's really good. So the next question I want to ask in two ways, and I'm going to do this one a little specific based on what I've learned just getting to know you guys, and that is two of you are indigenous. Heiden and Vergil grew up in your cities from the West. So I want you two to answer this question. I want you to kind of look into the camera out there, look at our audience, and I want you to talk to the church that's in the Bible Belt in the South, back on the East, who's considering partnering or planting in the West. What would you say to that potential partner church about how they could engage with you in the West?
Well, I'd love to speak to you really quick. As a practitioner and an indigenous church planter in Las Vegas, number one, we need you. And number two, you need us. We love to partner together, work together to help you plant a church in a city that is in desperate need of the gospel, in desperate need of new churches that are planting new churches. And we'd love to be able to come out and help you do that and help your people do that. One of the beauties of our church plant is seeing different people who have moved from around the country to join in the work, get established, find community, find their purpose in our city. Not only that, but come on, this is a great time to move to the West, specifically in Las Vegas. The Raiders are back. Come on, somebody clap with me, right?
Let's go.
We're next up. LeBron says he wants to put a team in the city of Las Vegas. I'm excited about what God's doing, but just with that though, in conclusion, the field, the harvest is plentiful.
Yeah.
We have close to 2.8 million people in Las Vegas. It's only growing, and the need is great. The churches are hungry. The people need the gospel. We'd love for you to help us in starting new churches in our city.
That's awesome. Thanks, Heiden. Vergil, what would you say to those churches?
Portland's a great city. Portland needs Jesus. We've got areas all around our city that we call church deserts. So these are places where if you lived in one of those surrounding neighborhoods, you'd have a really hard time finding a church to take your family to. And that's the kind of thing that breaks my heart, and hopefully is something that tugs at your heart as well. You want people living in those areas to have access to a healthy church, access to the gospel. So as you think about reaching the West, think about people like that. Try and put yourself in their shoes, put your family in their shoes, put your kids in their shoes, and just dream about their kids having a great youth group to be a part of, to be introduced to Jesus Christ and growing up in a Christian family. And what a great benefit that would be for them.
That's awesome. Thanks, Vergil. Now I want to, Keith, because your story's like mine. We're not from the West, but I feel like I am now. I've been there 22 years. You've been there a long time. You parachuted in from Houston. I parachuted in from the South. And David, you're a state exec. You've had a lot of guys come into that state from outside. I want you guys to talk to the potential planter. That guy that's out there that's praying through relocating from where they are to the West. What would you say to that individual about coming to the West and planting? Talk to that planter.
Well, the first thing I would say is start praying for a city. Get engaged with that city. Learn about that city. Understand about that city, but get that city on your heart. Don't just decide I'm going to go someplace and plant a church. Start loving a city, and then come and spend some time there. Do some ministry there. Do a mission trip there. Come out and see what's happening there and what God is doing, and then you'll be able to join God in the work that He's already doing in that place and in that state. And have others join you. Don't just come out by yourself. Bring others with you to help plant that church so that you begin with a core of people who are loving a city for Jesus Christ.
There's some statistics that just came out that said if you plant in the West, your church is going to be healthier, your wife is going to be happier, and your kids are going to obey you more. And so, just made that up.
Mike,
Where's the source for that? Where's the source for that?
I think one of the things that ultimately, I remember a moment with Louis Giglio. He said, if you have a light to shine, go shine it in a dark place. And I was a college student, 22 years old, and just said, hey, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to go shine my light in a dark place. And that's driven every decision I've made since 22 and allowed us to do something that has reflected just the potential in the West. And to be able to say, hey, there's some stuff that I think the rest of the country is going to experience in the future, and it's beginning in the West. And come be a part of that. Come be a part of that strategic decision to come out to the West.
Thank you, guys. Listen, if you study movement, gospel movement, anywhere in the world, gospel movement always begins in a pre-Christian context. When you study revival and awakening, it happens in a pre-Christian context. The last of those left in America is the Western United States. I know these guys share the passion that I share. If there's going to be movement in America again, it's going to begin in the West. At Sin Network, we'd love to come alongside you and help you join in God's activity of multiplying the church for the expansion of his kingdom in the West. If you're interested, reach out. We'd love to help you. Give these guys a hand for helping us out today.